Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. NITS is really pleased to be asked to be part of this summit in such an important issue, and I want to thank Jennifer, Ben, and ATT for really sponsoring this, and Westchester Medical Center, Dr. Sabino's remarks. What I'll do today is just offer a little bit more of what the Secretary offered you, some data, some good practices. I'll flesh out a little bit, and then some challenges on where we might go. I want to also recognize New York State, Karen, Ray, and New York State really were first state really to recognize emerging traffic safety issues, distracted driving many years ago, and drowsy driving. New York was among the first that jumped on those issues and led the way for many other states down there. Secretary Fox sent our reauthorization proposal, our transportation proposal, to Congress last week. It's a $302 billion package over 4 years that includes distracted driving incentive grants, as well as what we have this year. So I'll just review some of what we've been doing, some of the data you've heard already, so we won't go into it. I draw everybody's attention to our traffic stats series. These are research notes. We have technical notes as well. We also have summaries of all the good practices we have. So what you might find in my presentation are some challenges of things to do in New York State. And one of them, of course, is data. Dr. Sabino mentioned it about, and Secretary Fox mentioned over 3,000 killed. And it's difficult to define. Distracted driving is not an easy thing that we find on police reports, and you'll get that in the enforcement workshop that comes up next. It's a bigger problem, we suspect, than what the numbers indicate, because it's a transient problem. It's been compared to DWI and drunk driving. So we know if we put our finger on it, we can say 10% of all killed in America, about 22% of all injuries, that's all forms of distraction: drinking, grooming in the vehicle, reading a map, including cell phone use, adjusting equipment in the vehicle. But it's hard to measure, so that's our first challenge for everyone here, is to look at that data in New York State to try to refine it and how to make that better. So what do we observe when we go out and do our occupant protection surveys annually? This is our National Occupant Protection Usage Survey, but while we do that, we also look at cell phone use and texting as well. So we know about, go ahead. Oh, I keep touching that. Is that, yeah, sorry. Yes, I do have a tendency to do that. That's the Inspector Clouseau in me. So, about 5% of what we observe on the highway, people are using a handheld device. And again, it's, that's something we can observe. It's harder to see when people are texting. It's usually below the window line, so it's harder for police to figure that out. And we see about 1.5%. Again, we know 16 to 24-year-olds overrepresented, women more than the men in that group. Older people text less, obviously, so when we look at the 70-plus drivers, we see maybe 1% using devices. And what do we admit to when we do these surveys? Well, a couple speakers already mentioned we admit to always answering a call, making calls, and sending texts. This is worse for teens. When we look at teen behavior in our NOPIS surveys, over 70% of teens will say that they have composed, sent, and read a text while driving. That's a pretty difficult task. Dr. Sabino talked about cognitive distraction, physical distractions, and manual, auditory. All your attention is on the device when you're texting. So it's all three forms of distraction taking place. And again, teens, overrepresented in this group. We have a naturalistic study. This was the Virginia Tech study of a few years ago. This was 100 cars instrumented with cameras where we observed drivers over a year and saw what was going on. So we know risks are greater. We looked at near crashes as well as crashes. And again, the data was about the same. 22% of all crashes in that group we saw texting or distracted. Now, Dr. Sabino mentioned, admissions to emergency rooms, trauma centers. We're seeing a rise in that. A University of Ohio study did for admissions of pedestrians that are injured walking into poles and trees. So this is a problem that's growing across all modes of transportation. And I've heard one doctor, you'll never find a dog or a cat abandoning their survival instinct by walking into something, but people have a tendency to do it. This is how pervasive this problem is. So what's NHTSA doing? Real briefly, we've got a plan to, I mentioned earlier about understanding the problem more, and it's a hard thing to understand because of its transient nature. We compare it to drunk driving, but when you're drunk for the whole trip. You get in the vehicle drunk, you get to your destination drunk. When you're distracted or texting, it's more episodic. It happens in spurts across that trip, so it's difficult to get a good handle on just how bad it is. But we know we've got over 500,000 people texting at any given moment on the highways. I mean, that's just a huge, huge amount. So NHTSA is looking at getting a better handle on that, doing better studies, to get better police reporting. It's different across all the states, to just better understand the data and how big a problem this really is. We're developing test procedures for in-vehicle and nomadic devices, those devices that we bring into the vehicle with us, as opposed to those that are already in the vehicle. And we're looking at crash avoidance technologies. You've heard a lot about this in the recent past, about avoiding the crashes, lane departure warning systems, pre-crash braking systems, so where the vehicle will take over where the driver is distracted and bring the vehicle to a halt, or take some other action like a vibration to wake you up to do that. So NHTSA is involved in taking a look at that as the next leap forward for having an impact on distracted driving. And then, of course, the behavioral approach, which we will talk about a little bit more as well, and that is that high visibility enforcement coupled with public awareness. You've heard of click it a ticket, and you've heard of the drive sober or get pulled over. This whole idea of a consequence of the bad driving behavior and the linking of it to an enforcement message, as opposed to buckle up America, or friends don't let friends drive drunk. This idea that there is a consequence, that the police are out there. We've got a program, not just public information, but a program where there are checkpoints where you will be arrested and there will be a consequence. So we know this triangle, if you will, of a good law. New York's got lots of good laws, good programs supported by a communication plan, is that champion combination. And so our body of research shows that is useful. Secretary mentioned 43 states, 12 with prohibit any form. In 37 states I have a ban on cell phone use by novice drivers, and that's important. You think about teen overrepresentation in distracted driving crashes, so this idea of reducing distractions, number of passengers in the vehicle when they're out in terms of curfews, very, very effective countermeasure, good legislation in that area. So good laws, good programs, and Lucia Sanchez from our NHTSA headquarters office will talk more about how important that is when we fund programs and do programs to make our efforts the most effective. So the high visibility enforcement model works with paid media, usually around 2 weeks, and so everybody's familiar with click it or ticket, everybody's familiar with the drunk driving campaigns. Same thing the Secretary mentioned just this past April, $8 million paid media campaign on distracted driving. We know that the same elements can have an impact. The slogan, of course, NHTSA likes click it a ticket, and anything that has a cadence to it or a rhyming. So you drive, you text, you pay. And this is a little different. You pay in many ways. It could be an enforcement, it could be a ticket, you could pay with an injury, a fatality, or something even worse. So I'm going to show you that new ad. I think that's lined up now, and if I hit this, it should run. I don't know. I guess not. So somebody's going to have to help me run that. If you could just highlight that link and click on it back there. Yeah, go ahead. maybe just scroll up a little bit and hit play. You'll see that little button in the middle. Go ahead.
How many letters? 5 letters. Think about what am I doing right now? Smile. Smile? Uh-huh. This is so easy.
It's a little more, a much more graphic ad than NHTSA has run in the past. You recall, we've kind of avoided these very graphic crashes. You see these a lot in Australia, a lot in some of the European countries as well, and NHTSA had avoided them for a number of years, always ending with the lights, the idea of the ticket, and we have that thread. We may be able to see that later. We have a social norming version of this ad in addition to the enforcement version of it, where it ends with the police, with the lights. But here we have a very graphic crash, and so this is a little bit of a departure that's been very well received and is effective. So what else do we know in research in terms of what we can do here in New York or anywhere else? Well, Hartford and Syracuse were involved in a demonstration program 2 years ago, and we knew then, what we did then was high visibility enforcement, paid media. We were able to reduce handheld use and texting in both cities. We saw greater reductions in Hartford, and that was simply, I think, because they started at such a higher level in the pre-surveys for texting and cell phone use than they did in Syracuse. Syracuse had some pretty low levels to start with, but even there we saw 30% reductions in both cell phone use and texting. And so what we learned was we can have an impact. This is a countermeasure that works. This is something that we're recommending to all states and is fundable under this grant program that I mentioned under our authorization. And so they can be very effective. We've taken this to a more statewide level. We did it in 2 cities, and we went out to California and tested it out there as well. Also statewide in Delaware. California was a large region of 9 counties, 4 million residents, and again it was successful. The message then was phone in a hand, ticket in the other. And so here again you see this enforcement theme to our message as opposed to just don't text, but tying it again. And we saw similar results. California, Delaware, same thing. We were able to reduce those aberrant behaviors. You can take a look at our texts I mentioned. Go on our website, NHTSA.gov. All of these are there, but we know, those are effective countermeasures. We have a current demo ongoing right now in Massachusetts and Connecticut, and this is more to look at how we can have an impact on texting, because it's much more difficult, you'll hear from the enforcement panel, for police to identify someone texting as opposed to someone who's holding a phone up to their ear. And so the texting behavior, what we saw in Syracuse and in Hartford, we didn't write many tickets in that demo because it was harder for the police to identify that behavior. But we did identify some techniques that helped us do that. And because every agency is different, but here's what we know is useful. We're asking police departments across America to use an elevated vehicle, an SUV. You're higher up, you can take a look down into the passenger compartment to see if the driver is texting. We use spotters at one point on the road to call a violation down to the officer down the road. Unmarked, low-profile type vehicles. Motorcycles also provide a better view inside the vehicle, and routine and saturation patrols. Sounds very familiar. I mean, these are techniques that we can use for DWI and other forms of enforcement. Same behaviors are exhibited by distracted drivers as are exhibited by drunk drivers. This whole idea of nodding, improper lane travel, inconsistent speeds, delayed and slow starts. Typical signs of DUI we see in the vehicle initiatives. It was mentioned earlier about, I think, Ben mentioned it, this idea that what we're doing voluntarily now may be required in the future. This idea right now, NHTSA last year, about a year ago, issued distraction guidelines to encourage manufacturers to limit the electronic device type of distractions in the vehicle. These were voluntary and were issued last year. And what we looked at was voluntary to limit the time a driver must take his eyes off the road and perform any task to about 2 seconds, and 12 seconds overall for the entire task. So 2 seconds at a time, 12 seconds total. And so this was for manual entry of text, or video-based entertainment, displays of certain types of text, including messages and web pages. The stuff that we heard in a previous slide, we have our voluntary standards. We're also looking at guidelines for pneumatic devices, those devices that we all carry into the vehicle, smartphones, electronic tablets, pads, and also looking at a third set of guidelines to address voice-based, the OnStar, the Sync, and those types of systems that are already in vehicles. So that's what we're doing at NHTSA on the vehicle side. Connected vehicles, you've heard some about, the smart cars and V2V, vehicle to vehicle. Simply this whole idea that vehicles will talk to each other. I'm here, where are you? This idea that vehicles on the road will know there's a vehicle in a blind spot or another vehicle coming down the road. This is years off, but we're a little bit ahead of the game on this one than we would be for infrastructure or smarter roads. Intelligent highways is even a bigger investment. But that day won't be far off where vehicles will be able to communicate with each other. Someone approaching an intersection, the vehicle will know that and will alert the driver or start pre-crash braking. So the resources are here, and my message is we're here from Region 2, Richard, Shannon, and Jeffrey. We're at your service. All the resources of our agency are available to distraction advocates, to dorks. To the extent we can help, that's what we want to do, is to provide model legislation or good practices in our countermeasures that work manual as well. And so go to our website. You can find much of this there. Also, much of it's at distraction.gov and trafficsafetymarketing.gov. Lucia is going to talk more about that and give you more information about how that all works. But we're fortunate we're in New York. New York is one of the leaders in traffic safety in the nation, has been for years. And so we're confident that you're going to advance this agenda along with your advocates, along with the citizens that are involved in finding these solutions. So thank you, Jennifer, thank you, Ben, Westchester Medical, and AT&T for bringing us all together for this important summit. Thanks.